Hey everyone, welcome to the next tutorial for Python. In this tutorial, I'm going to go over two things. So in the last one, we went over our primitive types: integer, float, strings, and booleans. In this one, I'm going to go over, there's a couple of, they're called non-primitive types. They're not quite the most basic piece of data, but it's something that's made up of the basic piece of data. I'm going to go over what's called a list. And we'll also go over the print statement in Python. So in the last video, we went over integers like 4, floating points 10.5, strings like bill, and then booleans like true or false. So a list think of it like a container that can contain multiple primitive types. So if we want something that has like 3 integers in it, like we want it to contain the number 4, 12, and -10, we could type it like this. You would put the open and close square brackets, and this represents our list of not variables, but our list of pieces of data. So we can do like, I don't know what numbers I said, but we could do it a list of 4, 10, and -8. And you separate each item by a comma. You don't have to actually put the space in there, but I do just because it's easier to read. So we have a list, and you know it's a list. Every time you see these brackets right here, that means it's a list. So if we hit enter, and it outputs our list, so we have 4, 10, and -8. But again, since we didn't assign that to a variable, it kind of just spits it out to the screen, and it's lost forever. We can't use it. So let's make a variable. We'll call it myList, and we'll assign it 4, 10, and -8. So now we have a list, and we can retrieve it. Every time we type in my list, it actually spits out 4, 10, and -8. And it doesn't have to be 3 items. You can just put one thing in it if you want it. You can put the number 2 in it. So my second list equals just the number 2. So it's just a list of one thing. And you might say, like, why just put one thing in it when you could just assign the number 2 to a variable? Well, because later on in your code, you can actually write commands that can add stuff to the list. Like we can add like the number 3 to it, the number 4 to it, or we can remove certain items from the list. So it can like expand or collapse. If you like games, one of the things you would use this for, if you have like a bunch of enemies on the screen, those enemies there could be a list called enemies, and it's assigned a list of actual enemy objects. So you can access all the enemies on the screen and run code on them by just accessing that list and running a command on everything in the list. There's a million reasons why you would use a list. So they're really helpful and very important to learn. We'll get more in depth with them later. But just know this is how you make a list. And you don't have to store numbers in it. You can put, we'll do my third list. You can actually store anything in it. I can store booleans, integers, floating points, and strings all in it. And if we do my third list, see, it contains all those pieces of data. Typically, you usually kind of put all of the same type of data in a list. It really just depends on the program you're making. You could have a list that has multiple different types in it like this. But the majority of the time on things I've made, I kind of keep, like, I'll have a list that's just all integers or a list that's just all booleans. It's just kind of however you want to use it, but we'll get into that later. The other thing I wanted to go over was the print statement, which is probably one of the most important keywords you want to learn in Python. So you've probably noticed that when we type things like the number 4 on the screen, it outputs the number 4. This is because we're using idle, and one of the things it will do is kind of like print back out to us what the output of this line of code is. Most IDEs you use, like PyCharm, or if we save this program in a file and run it, it doesn't actually print the number 4 out on the screen. This is just kind of something idle does to help us out. But if you want to print something out actually on the screen for the user to see, or what I usually use it for, and what you'll use it for, is when you're running tests on your code, you always want to see like what is this variable equal this section of the code to kind of debug. You just type in the word print and open close parentheses, and then inside the parentheses it's like, what do you want to print on the screen? So we can print the word cat. So if I do this, it outputs the word cat. And again, idle kind of does this line by line automatically. It'll print out the output, but just know that's because it's idle, and that's kind of built in. But if I use PyCharm, here, I'll try and make something real quick in PyCharm. I don't even know if you can see this. I know the font's really small, but if I make something like, if I just put the number 4 and then run this program, our output's down here at the bottom. And as you can see, it didn't output anything. It's not like idle where it shows after we typed in the number. After we type in the number 4 and then I ran the code, it didn't actually show the number 4. But if I do print and then the number 4 and then run it, it actually prints out the number 4. So I'll probably make a tutorial on how to install PyCharm, because that's what I use. And when we start getting into making projects with Python, I'm going to use this and not idle. And I'll set it up to where you can actually read it. I know the font's really small right now. But yeah, you can print, let's do this. Let's print my list. And if you print my list, it outputs the list, just like it did when we made the list up here. In the next tutorial, I'm probably going to go over, let's see. There are some other types, like the list is a non-primitive type, and there are some other non-primitive types as well, but I'm probably not going to go over them just yet because they're a bit more advanced than the list. You have like dictionaries and tuples, and I'm missing like 2 other ones. Oh, sets. But I think that's too much to learn right now, so we'll just learn the list, and in the next tutorial I'll probably go over control statements like the if statement, the while loop, and the for loop, and we'll learn how to actually build some type of little program using like an if statement or something like that. So I'll see you guys in the next video.